A man who takes full responsibility for everything in his control becomes impossible to stop. Now look, there is no denying that sometimes in life we are hit with certain situations and circumstances that can just feel unfair. And at times we may even find ourselves asking the question of, why me? Why is it always me? Why now? Why am I always going through this stuff? At times previously, I've asked myself that, because you can be trying hard, you can be working hard, you can be doing the right things, and again and again and again in the same moment you are hit with difficult times. But there are two ways to approach this. One guy gets hit with difficult times, gets hit with difficult circumstances, and he allows it to frustrate him greatly. And he has an opportunity to try and deal with the situation himself and try and take responsibility, or as much responsibility as he can, but he doesn't. He deflects, and maybe rightly, maybe I'm not saying he's incorrect, but he decides to blame somebody else for why this has happened to him. Maybe at work he's having some real challenges and he puts it on his boss, he puts it on the team, and he doesn't feel like he can get promoted, and he feels like there is a certain ceiling, and he puts that on other people. Now, it's not to say he's wrong. He may actually be correct in a literal sense. There may be things that are completely out of his control, that are the fault of other people, that are happening to him. But there is another guy who takes a different approach and gets a better result. So he goes through the same struggles, he goes through the same difficulties, but he takes responsibility for it himself, even though in technical terms it may not be his fault. And the question we ask is, well, why would you do that? If something isn't your fault, you don't need to take the blame for it. It's not right. It's the fault of the people who did you wrong. It's the fault of the organization. It's the fault of whoever caused the damage or the harm or whatever. You say, yes, maybe on paper you're right, but this guy understands the importance of having control, having autonomy over his decisions, over his circumstances. And he knows that deep down, if he decides to blame other people and he falls into the trap of blaming external things for his life, he essentially relinquishes that autonomy. Technically, a situation may not be his fault. Maybe at work, his team is greatly underperforming, and subsequently, they won't get collectively or individually the pay rises that they were promised, even though this guy is overperforming. He's looking at his team, he's thinking, oh, this is terrible, but I am responsible for me, and only me. So what does he do? He doesn't sit there and complain. He goes and actively starts looking for a new position. He goes and actively starts looking for a new position at a company that he can maybe take the results to and say, yeah, look, our team didn't hit quota, but I was way, way, way above my target, and other people weren't working as hard and they weren't doing as well. I was. I'd like to be compensated for my work. I'd like to be in a place where I can grow. And he finds himself a different opportunity from a difficult moment. Now look, that's not easy. That requires skill, that requires confidence, and those things are accrued over time. But essentially the method to the madness there is that in difficult moments we do have a choice. We can blame other people, and we may be correct to do so. Or we can take responsibility for it ourselves, even though it's not technically our fault, and we can grow and we can do better from the situation. We can get a better outcome. In my experience, it has never served me too well to dwell on how others' actions have impacted me and to blame others too much. We may find ourselves at times falling into the trap of having a little whinge, especially when something affects you in a bad way. It gets under your skin. You're a human being. It's okay to express your dissatisfaction at such things. However, it's never served me too well to do this for too long, because first and foremost, again, you are basically handing the keys to somebody else. You are relinquishing your autonomy. you are relinquishing your emotional control and putting that in the hands of somebody else. And yeah, more or less, the times that I have experienced difficulty, somebody crashed into my car, right? No fault of my own. It's annoying. However, I learnt a lesson from that. Don't park the car where I parked it the last time. I resolved the situation for what it was. Some people maybe crash out at things like that. For me, it was a no-brainer. I spoke to the guy. I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm okay." I was like, "Well, look, I'm okay. You're okay. Your car's, fine, or your van's fine. My car's got a little bit of damage, but I'll get your insurance details and we'll sort this out the proper way. We'll both go home, have some good food, enjoy the rest of the night. That's it. It's going to be okay." I learned a lesson though. Although it technically wasn't my fault, I probably could have parked somewhere a little bit differently, maybe a little bit further away. And the lesson was, maybe park a little bit further away. Yes, you wanted to, get to the location that you were planning to go to a little bit quicker. You didn't want to walk too far, but maybe next time walk that little bit further and just rest assured knowing that it's probably far less likely to happen again. Even though, by the way, the parking, there was nothing wrong with it or anything like that. Parked in a perfectly legal location, but just little things that, you can start to learn and you can start to, I guess, add to your character from taking full responsibility for things. That's genuine growth when things that have absolutely nothing to do with you happen to you and it causes a negative effect or has a negative impact, and you can still find a way to take a positive from it. Essentially, when you don't do that and when you blame other people and you hold anger in your heart towards other people for certain things and you keep it in your mind, you're basically saying that there's nothing I can do about this. And somebody who is really, really serious and really, really switched on and really, really motivated to build a great life can't think like that or can't afford to think like that. Now, some guys will go the complete extreme and they'll be blaming their physique on their job because it doesn't allow them enough time to get to the gym. And it's like, well, there are people with jobs that are, harder and longer hours and they still find a way to get it done. Yeah, maybe they wake up really early, but that is the choice that they make. Or maybe they go to the gym late in the evening, but that is the choice that they make because they understand that if they weren't to get that training in, that their physique would get to a point where they no longer like the man in the mirror. And it's like, you don't grow from blaming other people and blaming your job or blaming your circumstances for why you are a certain way. Ultimately, if you want something, especially if you live in Europe and in the Western world as such, you can go and get it. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, some people have things harder, but when there is a will, there is a way, and you're not going to make improvements or become alike to the man that you want to be if you have this mindset that other people are responsible for where you're at. It's not the government's fault that you haven't got any savings. It's not the government's fault that you spend all of your money as soon as payday comes around. I'm sorry. It's your fault. And anything other than pure, honest, open acceptance of that reality is just going to hold you back. And some people discover this really late on. They discover this really late on. And the difficulty with that is that, the more time that passes by, the harder it is to turn things around. Now, I am a believer that you can turn things around, even in your 60s, in your 70s, and your 80s. You can find new passions, you can find things that give you genuine joy. You can find things that give you genuine purpose, but if we're talking about things like your physique, talking about things like your finances, it's a lot harder to get into great shape for the first time in your life when you're in your 50s than it is when you're in your 20s. It's a lot harder to start building wealth in your 50s than it is in your 20s. Think about all that compounding interest if you just consistently invest. If you don't blame anybody else or blame your company for not paying you enough, and you decide, you know what, I am going to live beneath my means, you know what, I am going to invest consistently, you know what, I am going to maybe even work overtime or get a second job at the weekends because I'm so committed to my long-term future and my long-term plan. Somebody with that mindset is always going to outperform the guy who looks to blame other people and looks to deflect responsibility from himself. Sometimes things happen to us and sometimes we have tough circumstances, and technically speaking, on the paper that it's written, it might not be our fault, but I do not believe, despite that it is going to serve you to adopt the mindset that somebody else or something else has control over your outcomes and how you respond to them. That's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. You've got to take responsibility to your response, or for your response for things that happen to you. You may have been dealt a bad card that has nothing to do with you, has no fault. It's no fault of your own. But ultimately, you do have authority and you do have agency over your response to that. Maybe somebody crashes into your car. Maybe somebody hits you with a car when you're on a bike. For sure. It's annoying. It's frustrating. Maybe even very dangerous. You may have some injuries. But you then have it in mind, okay, well, I'm in control of my recovery. I'm in control of how serious I take that recovery, how often I do my rehabilitation exercises, whether I do everything that I should do or whether I don't. That's on me. It's not easy. You're going to be frustrated. Sometimes in life, things are going to happen to you and you're honestly just going to feel like you've been sucker punched. Sometimes it's rough, and it's okay to feel that, but it's not okay for a prolonged period of time, especially if you want a good life and you want to build something different to other people. Right? I'm not talking to people that just want to coast. I'm talking to people who really want to build a legacy, really want to build something substantial and something beautiful. It's not acceptable to have the mentality that you basically shift responsibility to other people and to external circumstances. No, you must take responsibility. You must have that growth mindset. You must be able to take a very bad situation and try and find positive outcomes from it. There are going to be times though where, you can't do that. We're human. We're human. Sometimes we go crazy, right? We lose our minds when certain stuff happens to us. Just don't make it a habit that you're going to become a guy basically who just blames everybody and anybody else for his problems, for his circumstances, because there are people right now who came from more difficult circumstances than you and now are more successful than you. You've got people that came from the poorest parts of Africa that managed to fight and scrap and salvage themselves to a point where they could basically get a little bit of money, to the point that they invested that money, they grew that money, maybe they set up their own business, they managed to get to a different country, and then they set up another business and they just grew and grew and grew and grew and became really successful. And probably part of that is that they didn't allow themselves to make excuses. They took responsibility for every single situation in their life. Like, how can you beat that guy? How can you stop that guy? How can that guy be held back? He can't. But the guy who wants to basically blame his situation, his problems on anybody and everybody but himself can be stopped. It's easy. He stops himself. And it's sad. Because a lot of people have a lot more potential than they realise, but they become so fixated on blaming everybody else for their problems. Life sucks sometimes. Life is hard sometimes. Life throws difficult things at us sometimes. However, if you just take full responsibility for absolutely everything that happens to you, and most importantly, full responsibility for your response, eventually, if you keep working, eventually, if you keep making the right decisions, working hard, being disciplined, you're going to get what you want. You're going to win, because you just cannot be stopped with that mindset. You can't knock that guy off his bike. He just gets up and he keeps going. You can't beat that guy. Become the guy who can't be beaten. Become the guy who refuses to be beaten by circumstances. That's real character. Anyway, if you took some value from this video today, hit the like button, comment your thoughts down below, and consider subscribing for much more from me. As always, guys, thank you for your time and your attention, and I'll see you in the next one.